I've just finished watching our friend Tom pitching language at all to a strategy meeting. Can you hear me? Testing one, two, three. Okay, I know my audio is coming in because it came in on the YouTube stream. So can you hear me? Can you hear me? Yes. Okay, I cannot hear you. So possible my headphones are. Let's try switching to the speakers, see if that works any better. Try saying something now. Testing one, two, three. Tom, can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you now. I just got in.
Okay. I can hear Tom and he can hear me, Ernest, so it must be on your end. Do you want to just leave and rejoin, see if that helps, or at least leave the audio, reconnect? Anyway, I'll let you finish getting your headphones on.
I'm
Hello.
gonna
Can you hear
off
me now?
get sweaty.
Yes, we
Yeah.
can. Oh, there we go. Okay, so anyway, Tom did a great job. I was thinking originally, like, oh, this seems really theoretical. I was like, oh, wait, this is a strategy group. They just like to talk about strategy for the sake of strategy. And so this is perfect. So
Yeah,
that
it
was
is sort of
great.
my theory of strategy is that you need to do practical engineering on real systems.
Almost questioning the very purpose of their organization, but hopefully they have people who are doing real practice.
Yeah.
It seemed
But
like a good group, and so
yeah,
cool.
about I did about 15 years of holding courses for British Computer Society about 10 weeks of the year. So they're old, a lot of them are old friends, for put it that way. I lived in London part of the time, so did it there. Yeah. Okay. I have a feeling that I didn't have any homework, so I'm home free. But if I did have some homework, I could start feeling guilty.
Well, I think you were just going to give us an update on your. So last time, just to rehash, is we talked about the Ukrainian prospects
Ah,
for peace,
yes.
and the general sense was if we can get over our emotional disgust at various personalities involved, the um, the hope is that Trump would not be able to force a peace that Europe wasn't able to ensure Ukraine could survive, in short version. Um, at least that seemed to be sort of the rough consensus. And what would happen after that was the hope was that best case is that Trump gets pissed off at Russia. The worst case is things go back to the way they were. Um, is that so? My sense is that uh, it sounds like that's more or less where we're at, right? Is that it sounds like Putin hasn't budged and hasn't really, as far as I can tell, pulled the wool over Trump's eyes. I think there was some sort of limited ceasefire, but I didn't really pay attention. Have any of you been paying more attention?
Oh, yeah. I mean, Zelensky claims that he has instituted the agreed ceasefire and that Putin has just gone ahead and ignored it.
Hmm. What
That I
is
mean
the
that's the
ceasefire?
long and short. There's a ceasefire, yeah.
What level? What was the actual agreement about it, or what was
Okay.
agreed to?
Well, yeah, there is some dispute about that, but one of them was don't fire from the Black Sea,
Okay,
because that was one of, and the other was don't fire on
energy infrastructure, I guess.
exactly energy infrastructure, and of course there's the law like don't fire on civilians, for God's sake, choose some military targets or industrial, and Putin's just uh, he's not done anything except keep on pushing his advantage and killing and scaring everybody.
Yeah.
So every day Zelensky writes a little note saying, I did the ceasefire in good faith. We're trying to show we're willing to do a ceasefire. Putin doesn't. provably, and he is. I wonder if Trump is aware that Putin is making a bloody fool of him every
It's an
day.
interesting question. Yeah, I mean, Trump's awareness of being considered a fool is very odd. Like, there's certain things he's highly sensitive to, other things he is completely oblivious to. But at least I was checking the news that in the last few hours, Trump's basically yelling at Putin, saying like, "You're not doing anything." And
Oh,
so,
good. I didn't catch up with that yet.
yeah, so I mean, that seems to be the like I said, I think what we were considering the best case scenario. It wasn't realistic for Russia to actually do anything useful, but there was at least a slim chance that they could pretend to in a way that would feed Trump's ego, and they seem to have failed to do that.
Right. Right. No, I mean the rhetoric from Putin is always, "I agree in principle to a ceasefire, but," and then he has a list of impossible conditions he knows nobody will meet, and then he goes on killing everybody.
Right, and
And
the question was whether he could get away with that. And the interesting thing is that at least Trump seems to be ticked off about it, which is
well,
interesting.
oh gosh. Well, I'm glad to hear he's getting to the ticked off phase.
Yeah, so
I'm
um,
not impressed with Trump there.
no, I'm not, like I said, I have worked through my emotional pain with Trump, and now it's just treating him like a force of nature or a raging animal, and you try to understand what it's doing and how to work around it, and not get too emotionally involved. Strategic empathy, I think, was the term we used, and so far it seems to be working out in this context.
And then
Um,
there's the stock market.
Yeah, I mean, so we do a little digression on the crazy world of tariffs and the global economy melting down and what's
That would be
How about the
likely to
crazy
happen.
world of pseudo tariffs?
Yes, it's like this is why I like I'm glad to not pay attention, because everything we think we know one day is like totally reversed the next day. Which
Things
it is
like that.
certainly true that chaos and uncertainty is generally bad for the economy and for businesses. Um, on the other hand, if you accept, Zihan's view that we're moving to a deglobalized world, convincing everyone that America is not a reliable trading partner is the plan. Apparently, it's a little weird. Uh, um,
It's a plan that is Trump doesn't execute plans. He just does whatever.
right.
There's no plan in his head. He goes by who's kissing my butt and where I'm going to get money and
Right, but
who's-
let's talk about that. What exactly is Trump's motivation for putting all these tariffs and sabotaging the economy? Like, what narrative in his head might explain these actions?
Oh yeah.
I think, and this is a whole thing about Peter Navarro and him making up some sort of expert that doesn't exist, and he convincing Trump that tariffs are the way to go if you want to bring manufacturing back to the U.S. I think that's his
So
frame.
let's talk about that point first, because like let's forget about the tactics. Um, to what extent is a goal of bringing manufacturing back to the U.S. necessary and achievable?
I don't know if that's I think the ultimate goal is dictatorship. He just wants to
No,
run.
forget about what his goals are.
Oh,
Let's just look at the policy perspective as itself. Is the issue of bringing manufacturing back to the U.S. a worthy goal?
well, I don't think it is, but I defer to
I
you
mean,
guys.
okay, let's take a more limited statement. Is the goal of U.S. not being manufacturingly dependent on China a good goal?
Mm-hmm.
Let me be even more precise. Is it a good idea for the U.S. to be investing in the ability to produce the next generation of drone warfare in China rather than the U.S. a good situation? Right. So,
Oh,
so here's the thing: like Trump is crazy and irrational. Let's assume that. But then the interesting thing for me, right, is that I think Trump was way ahead of this one and probably correct that China is a genuine threat to world security, right? The fact that they're like pressuring the NBA and American newspapers to curtail freedom of speech and all this stuff, and lying about all sorts of stuff, including COVID. Like, being economically dependent on China and trusting them to act in our interest, which was kind of the way we were before Trump in 2016. I have to give him credit for that one. I think that is a legitimate concern, and that he deserves, as much as it pains me to say it, credit for being the first one to send along. Of course, because it was him, it made it even harder for anyone else to hear it, which is tragic and horrifying on so many levels. But
That's my truth.
Yeah. And so the challenge of, okay, and this is the problem that I feel like no sane person wants to sabotage the golden goose of Chinese manufacturing. So we're left with the insane person trying to do it, which is unfortunate on both directions. And
wait a minute, let me. The argument should be: is the Trumpian USA and China equally dangerous threats to world peace and economics? Because right now, if I had to choose one of them to disempower, I would choose the U.S., not China.
Here's the question. Would you be happy to go back to the pre-2016 consensus that if we just, keep buying stuff from China, eventually they become so economically dependent?
Okay, I agree with you, and the idea
in a world where Trump never existed, yeah.
Reasonable balance, of course, and not throwing away American jobs to give them to Chinese, of course. Okay, but now in terms of things that cause stability and move us towards war, I'm loving the Chinese for their stoicness, and I'm scared shitless of Trump, as are many other people.
Right. So let's and here's the interesting counterfactual is that and one of the things where we ended up in our last conversation about Trump and Ukraine was that time was on our side. Like, it still sucks that there's a war going on, but the West is still more resilient than Russia, and Trump won't be in office forever. I think we're still shy of that, although people do disagree about that. But I mean, even assuming he violates the Constitution, I don't think we're going to, having gutted the National Institutes of Health and NSF, we're unlikely to get a research breakthrough that will keep Trump alive forever. So there's that we have going for us. And the interesting thing about China is...
I have to interrupt you there. Imagine they create a Trump avatar with all of his leanings to act for him after his physical death, and then they elect that avatar president.
I think that the problem is that I think Trump's appeal is directly visceral. Right? Is that it's not like his ideas are terribly compelling in their own. Right? It's really his
visceral avatar of Trump.
No, I think the whole point of it is that I think this is an interesting thing that liberals fail to understand about conservatives. Right? Is that conservatives really value the physical and the visceral to the point where they will utterly ignore the logical and the rational in order to honor what they consider visceral. And so the whole point of, first of all, no one could create an avatar of Trump that people would agree represented the real Trump, because the real Trump doesn't agree with himself at all. Right?
Well, an avatar can disagree with itself.
Well, yeah, but things would do it. No one would believe it. Everyone would say, no, you've hacked the algorithm to say what you want to say, because it's not the real physical Trump.
Mega, they can believe that the avatar is
really you don't understand.
You
don't understand. But I think that's a fundamental misunderstanding of the conservative mindset, right? It's not that these people are gullible, generally. It's that they're resistant to logical argument, which is a completely different issue.
Yeah.
Right.
By the way, Ernie,
they are willing to...
Sorry, go ahead.
They're completely willing to argument in order to honor something else. And if you don't understand that something else, you will not understand what they believe and why.
But when you say conservatives, or yeah, uh,
I mean,
what do you mean?
let's say the red meat Republicans who love Trump,
You mean
one way or
okay,
the other.
MAGA? We're
Okay,
talking
right, that
MAGA,
right.
and
Let's call it MAGA. Yeah, that's a good first order. There's people who are not MAGA who voted for him because they believe that his diagnosis of what's wrong with America is more accurate than the Democrats. Even if they may or may not have been, enthusiastic or credulous about his ability to fix it, at least they felt like he was talking about the right problems, which the Democrats were basically in denial about. Um, and I think that's important to understand. Um, the Anyway, the point I was going to make is that there's a case to be made that if you're really worried about China, your better bet is to tie them to you more tightly economically and wait for Xi Jinping to die, because by that point, the demographics in China are going to just undermine their economic growth strategy to the point where they're not really a serious long-term threat. Um,
but when it comes to China, they have leadership. They have, they have one party. They have
right.
a bunch of,
Sorry, they have a
uh,
leadership based on a cult of personality that has suppressed all other news outlets and information sources. So
it,
yes.
it seems more capable than what we have right
Well,
now.
so right, right. Capable in which sense?
Capable in intelligence, in courage, in technology, even. Um,
Sorry, when
and
you say we, do you mean the U.S. government or America as a whole, or just Trump's administration?
no,
Because
they just say the government, the head of governments. You talk about Xi and his people.
so he so that's interesting, right? Certainly at a narrow level, yes. Okay. But you have to remember that he is tied into the Communist Party, communist economics, and all those systems, which have been based on decades of lying and falsification. And he's
Mhm.
exaggerated, right? I mean, the odds of China's economy imploding under the tariffs is not zero. And if the Chinese economy implodes, the Chinese government implodes, right? And so the fact that he misjudged Trump enough to let things come to this point is arguably a fairly severe strategic failure on, Xi Jinping's part. Like, if he's so
But
smart
how
and
can he?
capable, he should have
How
understood
can?
this.
Mm, I don't, well,
Well, look at it this
I
way:
don't know.
Xi Jinping is in greater danger of losing his job than Trump is, which implies that Trump is doing something smarter than Xi Jinping in this context.
Really? Well, I don't.
Yeah, because I mean, it's because like Trump could sabotage the U.S. economy, and he would probably still be in office, for the rest of his term, right? If the
Mm.
Chinese economy gets sabotaged, which Trump, I don't particularly like this strategy, but in all fairness, that's what Ronald Reagan did, right? He got Russia, the Soviet Union, to spend itself into oblivion until it imploded. And like it's horrifying for me to compare the two. And I still think it's the wrong strategy in this case, even if it was a decent strategy in Reagan's case. But it's not without precedent to create an economic shock that destabilizes your principal adversary. And that's the thing about Trump that it's easy to overlook, is that there's a certain, I don't, it's certainly not intelligence. There's a certain brutish cunning to what he's doing that a sane, rational, thoughtful person would never take, that is often more effective than the sane, rational approach. And that's what's terrifying. Like, I mean, the odds of Putin painting himself into a corner and US and the Ukraine actually increasing aid to the point where Ukraine can actually make progress against the Russians feels higher now than it ever was under Biden, right? It's bizarre and it's crazy that that's how we got here, but I don't want to deny that fact. And the same thing with China is like, I'd like to think that if we just took uh, the gradual route and kept the economic ties increasing, that China would um, A, never resort to military force because the economic cost of war would be too high, and B, that their soft power attempts to undermine the West would be unsuccessful. But it is certainly possible for reasonable people to disagree with that. And if you say, well, and then the question is, okay, what's the alternative? Well, the alternative is to force China's hand. So
In this
it's crazy, yeah, but that's where we're at.
in this topsy-turvy world, um, even though I like you, I don't really like China's human rights record and all that stuff. China versus the U.S. right now, I have
I mean, would
as
you rather
I
live under
prefer
Chinese
China.
information? Would you prefer China's information environment to the Americas?
No, no, not
Okay.
not talking as U.S. and China as one, as entities, and China's influence in the Asian world over there, and even with Europe. They are more intelligently trying to team up with Europe when it comes to these tariffs things than the U.S. The U.S. is pissing off Canada,
Yeah,
Mexico,
yeah.
all the friends. Like,
No, so here's the interesting way of phrasing it. I think the US, China is more predictable because they have clear, obvious interests and clear, obvious steps that they will take. And they are easier to reason about,
mm,
right? Trump is unpredictable and a wild card. And those of us who value predictability and being able to forecast consequences naturally are deeply allergic to Trump. What's fascinating is that in a world of rational actors, an impulsive actor has a strategic advantage. Like the very
mm,
reason we hate him means that he may be. I think Scott Alexander from Slate Star Codex, the rationalist blog, who's very much not on the Republican side of most things, says there's a lot of horrible things that Trump's going to do, but by his very unpredictability, he may accomplish several bizarrely good things that we never had any right to expect. You know, and like I'm feeling this viscerally in the area of medicine, right? Like my family's all doctors, and they're all horrified by what's happening there. On the other hand, if there's a 10% chance that at the end of this we say, we should stop obsessing over medicine and obsess over like healthy eating and changing our food system to like avoid giving everyone diabetes. Like it's impossible to imagine ever getting there under any normal environment. One could imagine a crazy tail case scenario where something like that happens, where they radically change both the way that we review and approve drugs and we put as much money into helping people eat and live healthy lives as we do into treating their diseases. I mean, I'm not saying it's likely, but it is the sort of thing that is conceivable in a Trump world that was inconceivable beforehand because of all these weird, impulsive, crazy things. And I'm not saying this to defend it. I'm saying that this is the strategic mindset, to play with Tom's favorite word, to say, okay, what opportunities does this destabilization create? And can we take advantage of them? Which is kind of where we ended up with, I think, in the Ukraine discussion, even if it's harder to digest for things closer to home.
there is this show called I've Had It. It's a couple of white ladies that are funny. That they are in the Democrat progressive side. They had this thing, and this is what I'm thinking. Would you fly, from the West Coast to the East Coast wearing a MAGA hat and acting as a MAGA, or being, wearing a MAGA uniform
Hmm.
and not being able to tell anybody that you're being paid to do that?
Hmm.
What's your price? What would you know,
Hmm.
millions, whatever, and none of them, they like, there is no money that I
Yeah.
could justify having done that, and then looking at myself and my friends, like my gay friends or
Right.
whatever,
Right.
and I think the same.
Right. And so, but you're proving the point because the coastal liberals are so intolerant. The amount of shame and ridicule they would heap on you for doing that is inconceivable. Right.
I'm not even talking about outside. I'm talking inside. Like, from for me, I couldn't see
Sure.
myself.
Right.
I don't care about people. I could have $1 billion.
Well, sorry. Well, sorry. If they paid you $1 million to wear that hat in your own house where no one would see you, I bet you would be willing to do it.
Oh, yeah, in my own house, yes, but
Yeah, exactly.
to
So
put
you don't
my
want to be seen
body,
by other people. That's the whole point.
yeah, I don't wanna. Okay, so what if I could do that and then I have some magical device that would erase people's memories of that happening?
Well,
That's another question.
okay. So right. So the idea that like, but why? Right? Because it's not like you wearing a MAGA hat is going to change political opinion in this
It's my
country.
I have we talk
This
about core
visceral,
value.
right?
Yeah, I have
You have a visceral hatred of these things, right? And
yeah,
so Ernest, let me just repeat what you said: that you would make an economically irrational act because of your visceral sense of identity,
yes, I
and
would.
that is exactly what Trump is doing. He's making
But
visceral acts that are economically irrational.
but Trump is a child rape. I
Oh,
cannot separate that.
but yes, but let's be clear. There's lots of reasons to hate Trump, okay? But it's important to understand, and this is the point I was making to you about, the MAGA conservatives, is they place an insanely high value on visceral integrity, that they mean what they say what they mean, and yes, the facts may be wrong, yes, the consequences may be horrible, but damn it, I'm standing up for what viscerally makes sense to me.
But we
And
don't know what that is. They
what?
changed. We don't know what that is.
Yes, exactly. And this is, and Ernest, you and I have had this conversation more than once. Is like, I hate Facebook, I hate, these big tech things. And then you post something on Facebook because damn it, it had to be said, and that was the only way to get across to people. Right. I
Mm.
couldn't predict that, but that was your visceral truth. Right. And it's a funny thing. And I think about this with AI and avatars, Tom. The thing that I know about AI, and I have relations with many AI, and it's that they're very thinly embodied, is that you can rewrite their memory, you can reboot them, they can be deleted trivially and reconstituted, and you can't tell the difference. And, again, that's thanks to the Scott Alexander thing. One of the things that's true about humans that we value is that we are basically uneditable. Or at least some, is that when you say something, and just like, we have this conversation here, we show up next month. I expect more or less, I have a few friends that I occasionally struggle with this in. If we say something now, then you will admit that you said that, and you will make decisions and choices in continuity, not identical to, but in continuity with your past behaviors.
Mm.
And the biology that you have really forces that. And the problem with avatars and AI is that is totally not the case. And if you think that's the case, they can fool you for a while, but it's really, do I trust this company that's running these servers? Do I trust the person? Like, you have to trust a whole lot of things to believe that about an AI or an avatar, where I just have to trust on biology and the difficulty of cloning to believe that the person I see as you is the same person that's going to be here next month. And I think this is the interesting thing about the consumer food. It's like, this visceral stuff matters. Like, I think that one could make a case that there's a lot of Democrat politicians who say, like, I could, Al Gore, I could program an avatar that would be more compelling than the actual Al Gore on the issues he cares about. I mean, maybe that's unfair, but it's conceivable, right? Because Al Gore was about his ideas, right? It wasn't his visceral sense of who he was that was really what drove people to admire him. And it's a very different way of governing and ruling. And I would argue in this coming age, this is an interesting thought, that, in this world, I can imagine where every city would want all of the leaders to physically show up in a square, once a year, where everyone could shake their head and make sure that's an actual real person. Because that's who you want to trust. Like, you want to know not whether this person is brilliant, but they're going to be physically bound to live in whatever decisions they make. And for many people, that is how they think, is I care less about how right someone is than knowing that they will feel what I feel.
Yeah, and to me, that's a problem. Like, and we've talked about this before. And uh, for us to be able to be human, our systems cannot be human. Our systems have to be mechanized, and we write laws. We have systems that execute those laws and make sure that we operate by those laws. But human overriding those systems should be impossible unless we are under the direst of emergencies.
So
But humanity,
let me just make sure I understand your terms. I get when we say that these things need to be codified, right? And that they should be written down. But mechanized is a different thing than what we currently have, right? We
I
still have
know.
judges. And so are you actually advocating for total mechanization? That there should
Yes.
be no judges, no legislatures, everything's decided by
Or
machines.
yeah, to the maximum level possible, which
Okay, but
there could be still
what is the level
judges.
possible? But that's the
There could
question.
still be
What is the level?
judges. The judges would just uh, monitor that things are happening as they should be. Everything is
Well,
recorded.
okay, several things we agree on. We agree that codification is important so that we have established norms that are transitable. We agree that a permanent record of public decisions is vital, that having that people trust. Um, the question, of course, is what is the extent possible and what is the extent desirable, right?
Well,
Because if you trust the mechanization, you trust whoever created that mechanization, right? And as we've seen, like if someone builds a AI decision bot that is biased in a
oh wait,
certain
no,
way.
AI.
So sorry. So you say mechanized? Do you mean deterministic? Like a
Yes,
heuristic?
in
So people
that.
are building, sentencing guidelines and rule decision bots ahead of time. Do we say that these systems should ignore visual and auditory inputs in making any decisions? That they should only read transcripts that have been digitized by some other system?
Well, yeah, that's one of the things that when it comes to evidence, for example, in a trial, whatever, uh, one person shouldn't be the one determining, oh, this piece of evidence is admissible or not. Not, it should be like a group of people, and so that one brain cannot break everything.
So so sortition is the technical term for like a jury, right? And I'm a
Mhm.
big fan of sortition systems. And the idea of, let's use the term automated, which is a little bit more neutral. Uh, Automated systems overseen by sortition, where we get juries of people drawn, is actually quite attractive in a lot of ways. The one downside of that is precisely the reason that America wanted to have a president. Is that if you, for a stable system that's sort of where the world does not change, that works great. If there's a crisis, the idea of having an executive with animal energy to say, like, hey, there's a problem here, we need to do something, um, is what keeps the system from devolving into stasis. At least that's been the theory since Roman political philosophy, which is why systems with strong executives tend to outcompete those without them. Workers' collectives are wonderful, but they tend to stay on the margins. Anyway, we're rambling out here. I'm sure Tom has thoughts. I want to see if he's reacting or responding to anything.
I'm listening. I sent you copies of the plans I made for the Ukrainian defense, two of them.
Oh, thank you. That was the nominal purpose of this. Would love to hear you elaborate on them to the extent you're comfortable. I can put them on the
Okay.
screen if that helps.
Yeah, I'll do one of them just for fun. Maybe it'll raise some thoughts.
Hmm.
So I need to share.
Yeah, I have them up if you want me to share, but it's better if you can so you can navigate. Great.
Yeah, and let's see. Okay.
Okay, I don't speak Ukrainian, so this can be
You
difficult.
don't speak
Oh, yeah, okay.
Ukrainian. Yeah.
It's just
Part
I
of
don't read it.
yeah, part of the fun here was actually the Ukrainian bit, but I'll just take this one. Um, let's see. So these are my prompts, and so we start off with analyzing what they've got for values, and then quantifying them in language, right?
Mm.
And just to be nice, I said, use English and Ukrainian to make it a little bit easier for the Ukrainians reading it.
Hmm.
What I found was it didn't matter whether the second one, he actually gave me nothing but the Ukrainian plan. So I don't have time to do anything. I know you can tackle it. So I fed the Ukrainian without having read it in plan, and it dealt with it like it was English.
Yeah.
It didn't care, which I thought
Yeah.
was, and then it
Yeah.
also at the end of the plan, I said, and do everything in Ukrainian in addition. Anyway,
Yeah, so actually, I can believe I can read Ukrainian well. I'm curious whether the Ukrainian had spit out, whether people said, "Oh yeah, this makes perfect sense. It's well
yeah.
written."
But here's the same table. I just said, make a Ukrainian
Oh,
version.
okay.
So bingo, that's nice.
And did people look at it and tell you that that actually worked really well for them?
Uh, we did not review it.
Okay, so you don't know yet. We'll find out, I guess, if next time
Yeah,
whether
so yeah,
I can
and
believe
then
it. It's yeah.
okay. Then I asked it to analyze how many objectives they had. They actually stated something like, we have 4 main objectives. And I said, go on, search for objectives. And it found 40 different objectives, which is interesting.
Hmm.
And, number 40 is something about NATO, which sounds like an important objective to not forget. So, and it gives exactly where it found the objectives. Okay.
Hmm.
So I thought just that idea that it could go way beyond what they perceived as objective, but then they have to admit these are objectives. And
Mm.
then brought in the idea of what I call a master specification, which is that each objective has one and only one, if you like, a database of everything, and it's the only one source of truth. And then you will select certain elements of it for presentation, but that doesn't change anything. There's still only one source of truth for each. This innovation scaling objective. By bringing that in, I'm trying to work out how they can organize everything they do. Because every new plan has certain common things that need to be in a common database, that kind of stuff.
Hmm.
So I did that for all the objectives in both, yeah. And then I said, okay, we got 40 objectives. If we deal with all 40 objectives right now, the war will be over and we might have lost. So we've got to choose the top 10 and focus on them. And when they're done, we can start eating away the others. So we are not rejecting these objectives. Here's better. We're not rejecting objectives. We're just saying we can't cope with them without delaying any fighting back to Russia and them defeating us before we can do anything. So this is about prioritization and then consciously deferring critical objectives rather than rejecting dealing with them.
Hmm.
And then the means, the strategies, the prompt for strategies. Give me some good strategies. So again, partly it's reading what they have given, but it's also figuring out strategies that are necessary to deliver the values that they have talked about. So pretty nice here. This one strategy, the grants, which they're actually very keen on right now, getting more money. And here are the main objectives which it supports, and here are the main stakeholders. And I asked it to do some estimates. It didn't really give us numbers, but it tried. And then reference papers. So and then the same thing essentially in Ukrainian. And then how do we get rolling quickly? Because we're obviously things are day by day and week by week very critical for them
Yeah.
with Putin continuing the war and them choosing to stop. So, action and results every day would be a good idea. And uh, so here is strategy one, and I've talked the AI into decomposing it into weekly things to be done with an estimate of what progress we're making towards our goals and how many people you would require, of what type of people to involve. So it's helping us plan in detail how do we get down to doing something uh, every day, every week, uh, and showing results. And that's
All right. So did you
about,
already present this to them?
No, I sent it to Alex, the CEO, and his reaction was, "This is wonderful. This is great." He's reading my competitive engineering book and saying, "Wow, I understand even more deeply why we have problems and what to do about it." And his last direct contact with me, he said, "We have to spread this as widely as possible in Ukraine as fast as possible." Now, at
Wow.
that point, he went into silent mode for almost 2 weeks, and I'm guessing he has other priorities, like the Russians are shooting up Odessa from the Black Sea or something. I don't know. So in other words, we're in a pause mode here, but still very enthusiastic. This is
Yeah.
great stuff. He also introduced me, I think I told you, to two key people, one an American living in Ireland and another a Spanish French guy living in Spain, who are uh, very intelligent and experienced in planning and systems, and they love this stuff too. I had a 1 hour meeting with each one of them. So, in a sense, we have a core team of Alex and the two other guys, and me and Alex as a driver empowered to spread it. So, I'm hoping, when Alex isn't trying to survive and Putin wiping out Ukraine, we get back to this stuff.
Yeah.
Uh, Something at the end here, which was kind of funny. I'm a fanatic on, as you know, on things not being unambiguous and clear. You can't really plan. Here are a couple of the plans, one in Ukrainian, one in English. They fed to me, and I asked the AI to tell me what is ambiguous and unambiguous. So it said, well, out of 349 sentences, 168 are relatively clear, but 181 sentences, or 50%, contain at least one ambiguous or undefined word or phrase, and then a phrase, and then they gave examples of it, vague terms. Let's see.
Hmm.
Yeah, they're doing it. Yeah, here they are actually from the original Ukrainian. All right, have to
Hmm.
deal with it. And so conclusion, it's all bullshit is the conclusion, but it's
No,
very
no,
deep.
no. That's not what it says. It says it assumes a relatively high level of technical jargon and assumed knowledge.
Okay.
I know you
Then
want to. That
yeah.
was an ambiguous and
Then
unclear statement on your part. That.
I asked for 10 detailed examples, and here
Mhm.
it is both in English and Ukrainian, so they can, fight against it or not. And then I asked it to take one sentence and
Mhm.
really go at it, like, take this one sentence now, write down 10 different ways it could be interpreted. What does that mean? It means, my God, if you use that sentence, we'll all be fighting each other for our misinterpretation. And here they are. So we've got to get down to a point where it's not possible to get 10 different misinterpretations. Yeah, that was it,
No,
just for fun.
that one's actually good because I think that's um, uh, uh, I have been in meetings where that sort of ambiguity had the like people, and sometimes it's not even just the language, it's also the emotional baggage people bring into the conversation, where people assume one interpretation versus and someone else's, and they completely argue past each other, right? Like,
Right.
it's like one person's worried about corruption, the other's worried about efficiency, and they might actually agree on something, but they get stuck on the words.
Yep. Yep.
Uh,
Yep.
and I think that's one of the interesting things that I always think about with language is like, oh, you want to have good definitions. Definitions assume that you're speaking the same language and that you understand what those words mean. And in, let's call it superficial usage, that's fine. In an emotionally high stakes situation, it's rarely the case, at least in my experience with marriage and parenting, is that a word that has a very clear, well-defined, well-understood definition is taken completely the opposite because of the emotional context in which it's being interpreted. And this is the interesting question I always have about implementation is we talked about this, Ernest, before about like you want to just write things down to explain the culture. The problem is that I think you use one of my favorite quotes, right? That culture eats strategy for breakfast, right? And a corollary of that is that culture is upstream of language. We only know what words mean because in our culture we use the word to mean that.
Mhm.
And you can, because of that, you cannot use language to change culture. It's trying to pull yourself up by your own bootstraps because you're using the existing understanding of those words. And that's where we have this phrase at work about like, what's the ritual that gives meaning to these terms? Like, it's one thing to say we really value fiscal responsibility, and in our family, it's like, okay, well, if we do that, then every week we sit down and go over the budget, right? Because that's what it means to be fiscally responsible. It doesn't mean that we just write down a budget and never look at it, because that's what some places people think means being fiscally responsible is. We don't have to bring Trump into this, but we can if you want to, right? Is that the actions, and especially repeated actions that are publicly visible, is what gives meaning to words, right? That's how you train a dog to sit. You don't expect it to read a dictionary. You wait for it to sit, and then you use the word sit. It's like, oh, okay, that word is associated with this emotional context for what happened.
Ernie, I put a slide up there. Can you see that? 5.3.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So this is from my strategy ring book, which I know you have linked to, and I've been quite fanatically in the engineering sector,
Mm-hmm.
and when we got this uh, culture eats strategy for breakfast Drucker quote, I started thinking slightly differently. So I got the AI system to give me some arts for planning
Mm.
as engineering. So here's a good list
Yeah.
of them. And then the fun was
Yeah.
I said, correlate these arts, which are visceral, with
Yeah.
my engineering things. And I acknowledge that these arts must be in play and they influence the outcome.
Yeah.
So I thought I'd
If this is fascinating. I'm curious. You were able to translate into Ukrainian. Could you imagine translating your entire talk into artistic rather than engineering language and giving it with a straight face?
well, interesting challenge.
I think this translation thing is very important because without that we wouldn't be able to do anything. I might have a medical issue that I don't know how, I don't have the language to explain it to anybody. I have to
Hmm.
go to a doctor. A doctor has to use the doctor's knowledge and experience to use the right words, medical words, and to talk to another doctor maybe, and then that other doctor will have to talk to, a psychiatrist or somebody. We have a bunch of interfaces that we tend to ignore, but that are very important when it comes to like law. If I'm suing somebody, I don't do that because I don't have the language or the code, to talk law. I have to go through a
Yeah.
lawyer. So we have to admit that, and like I said, we have to mechanize all those things. If we can, we have this
But,
real
but, so,
world work.
right. But here's the thing that's interesting. So anyway, I actually wrote a silly little short story about like the de-jargonizer. What would happen if you could just make everyone fluent in any topic, right? And this is the challenge. There's two things that are underappreciated. One is that you're building not just information but knowledge, right? Like I was reading a physics. I tried to read like a physics book when I was in high school, and I understood what all the words meant, but I couldn't understand why, how to fit them together or what it meant, right? It's just that the concepts that they were, the implicit concepts they were assuming, you know, didn't exist. And therefore, just knowing the terminology was useless, right? The second is, and this is the good and bad thing about, again, another Scott Alexander, priesthoods, is that there's a culture that's associated with that jargon, right? Translating the jargon, if you don't understand the culture, ends up um, giving you a sense of knowledge but the inability to act skillfully. I mean, I kind of feel like that way in normal society anyway. Like, I know the language, that doesn't mean I actually know how to act in a way that is culturally appropriate that gets me the results I want. And so, like, tools like this are important, and I think a lot about that. But the it's not merely a matter of translation, right? There is an enculturation process that is also necessary because, like in physics, the words energy means something very different in physics than it does in everyday life. And if you try to insist that they're the same thing, you will, regularly make a fool of yourself, which I've done, I won't say how many times. Um, and so this is the hard part, is that translating the words, the technical part has gotten easier, which means the relational part becomes even harder. Because it used to be you would get some of the empathy through the labor intensive process of learning a language, right? But now that you can get the translation part for free, you have to swallow that whole empathic cost upfront on its own.
And
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 right,
that's the problem because the people who hold the culture, you will have to trust them. So
well, actually,
people
no,
who,
it's worse than that, Ernest. You have to become them. You have to learn how to see the world through their eyes
but that's
so that you can.
impossible.
Well,
We
but
can't do that.
it's funny you should say that, right? There's this term we have. I'll give you the real world examples first of how this does work. Okay, Martin Luther King Jr. was an intellectual studying in Boston in the North, and he, surpassed in those worlds. And then he heard about the poor Southerners who were suffering under racism, and he decided to get involved. So he was someone who had lived in the world of the educated white upper classes, who chose to identify with the poor Southern blacks and acted as the bridge to help them act in a way that would get them the result they wanted in the dominant culture, right? I didn't realize this. I don't know how many of this. Gandhi was a lawyer in South Africa, right?
Mm.
And he came back to India. We think of him as a quintessential Indian, but he was actually very much like Martin Luther King. He was an outsider who had gotten encultured into the dominant culture without losing his identity, and then came back into the context to help elevate those people to act in a way that would get them the thing that they wanted. And Moses in the Bible, the historic figure. I mean, the Christians' view of the incarnation is almost the same thing. And this is the terrifying yet also hopeful thought, is that there is this process of enculturation and incarnation that is the only way that you enfranchise people. Is you have to have someone who has a foot in both worlds that can act as a translator, not just in terms of the ideas and the words, but in terms of the actual visceral practices that create change. Because what Martin Luther King can do, it's freakishly brilliant, the more I study this, is that he trained people how to sit in, like blacks, how to sit in white drugstores and get abused and vilified and not react. Like he literally would hire white friends. His white friends would sit there and yell and harass this black guy so he could learn how to sit in a drugstore and not react. And when white people saw black people doing that, it fundamentally changed their perspective of blacks as this subhuman inferior race. When they realized, oh my God, that is superhuman character and control that I don't even have. My whole worldview that I've been indoctrinated into has been falsified by this dramatic, visceral act. And there's no way around that. Like the fact that technology makes these certain things easier makes the visceral human acts that much more rare and valuable.
So who is the target here? The audience that saw the behavior, or the people doing the behavior? Because
So the
if
real
it comes to
question
a
is what
society,
change do you want to make in the world?
mm,
Right. And this was I was doing you might appreciate this. I was trying to get a good definition of executive function. And it's an iterative process of clarifying and aligning intents, capabilities, and impact. And you have to decide, like, okay, there's lots of things wrong in the world. What do I want to fix? And then saying, okay, what's the cheap and easy part that I can automate? And what's the painful, visceral part that I have to put my life on the line? I was reading a story about a Polish poet who in the 1970s went back to Poland, assuming he was probably going to die a horrible, impoverished death. But 10 years later, his poems ended up, empowering the Polish uprising. It's like people like that who take those kinds of risks and say, okay, this is a thing I'm willing to lay my life down for, that if they're very wise in how they do it and very reckless in being willing to do it, create these outsized change in systems, right? Mere technology by itself doesn't do anything. Steve Jobs coming back and saying, I'm taking $1 a year salary to show that I'm here not because I want to make money, because I really care about the company. You know, these visceral sacrificial acts. I mean, and this is like I said, I hate to give Trump credit for this, but the fact that he was a successful, quote unquote, businessman and threw himself in the ring, you know, I don't know if this is fair or not, because arguably it's just a narcissism, but it was perceived as this person really cares about making a difference here. He's not just a career politician who's doing this because it's the next rung up the ladder. That was really attractive to certain people,
Even though
right?
that's fake.
Even if it may be largely fictitious. It's probably fairer to say that in Trump's mind, making a public impact and making himself look good are indistinguishable, so he doesn't think in those terms. But like understanding, like we talked about that last time, understanding what he does care about and the kinds of results that do impact his ego is critical to understanding how things are going to play out, right? And so the it's bizarre, right? In that the one thing that I feel like it's safe to say, no, it's not really safe to say it. There's a certain very narrow sense in which Trump's ego is more tied to concrete results than a typical politician. In that, like Biden, I think cared a lot about looking like a competent manager. And a lot of people value that about him. I really value that about him, right? Trump does not care about that. And he does completely insane things, which is horrifying on so many levels. But it also means that he does things that people who are concerned about a certain kind of performance would never consider doing. And I think and this is the land this plane is, this is the thing when you're trying to start a movement. There's a lot of value of being seen as sympathetic to a movement, right? You've probably heard this one. There's the March on Washington. There's two people who are marching and saying, "Wow!" One person says, "It's so great to see so many people committed to the cause," and his friend said, "No, no, no. There's lots of people involved in the cause. Very few of them are committed." He goes, "What's the difference?" He goes, "Well, they're passing a restaurant. They're serving a bacon and egg breakfast. The chicken was involved. The pig was committed." And I've discovered that is very much the case, is that when you're doing a radical change where the cost of being sympathetic to it is low, but the cost of actually making it happen is high, people are looking for an irrevocable sacrificial act, like signing the Declaration of Independence, basically committing yourself to treason, is a sacrificial irrevocable act to say, okay, I'm willing to follow these wealthy landowners, even though I'm not getting the vote, because I believe they're committed to the thing I care most about. And that's always the hard part, is if you choose the wrong thing, then you either fail or you die for nothing. But if you choose the right thing, you can change the world.
And die for it.
And die for it, yeah. You die one way or the other. What is it? The brave man, the coward dies 1,000 deaths, the brave man only once. So anyway, this is the segue to your homework, Ernest, which is you would like to lead a movement and you would like to take the Rageology mailing list and articulate some values that you think they could rally behind. Right?
Okay.
Right? You talk a lot about how important it is to codify things. Can you codify Rageology?
Well, I have been thinking about this for weeks, and in that Datocracy,
Mhm.
and yeah, I have an outline of something. So
So we're ending now, but like so I guess this is the thing for you. So there's two things that would be interesting. One is next month present your outline, whatever you've got, of both the values and then of a process for getting rageology, whoever's on the mailing list to at least affirm it in some fashion, right?
mm,
Because the and then the question, and then I guess the third question is, if these people agree to these values, what could you then do, right? What's the
By the way, I can't resist. If we were doing lean startup,
mhm.
I would tell Ernest to go out on the street and sign up at least one committed member and get at least a symbolic payment as membership.
Yeah.
mm,
Either money or at least being willing to put their their
Yeah,
their their name and face on
commitment.
a document.
So
Right?
mm.
Is it right? And maybe that's actually the thing that you like is, would you be willing to go on a public website with your face and say, I'm a rageaholic, not a rageaholic,
Geologist.
whatever, and I endorse these values, right? Having something, some visceral or economic thing where they actually take a stand based on those values.
So write the radiologist values and try to get people to either commit money to it or to put their name behind it.
Or something. Yeah, it's thinking about what. Yeah, because then you'll find out.
Yeah.
okay, I'm going to go get dinner and watch my favorite TV
All right.
program.
Thank you so much, Tom. Thank you, Ernest. This was
Thanks
good
for
and
your
fun.
flexibility with my
Thanks.
schedule.